Welcome everybody to our second Stay Connected Sunday. It's a pleasure to have. This is our second Stay Connected Sunday. Really appreciate you all being here, discussing this conversation of mental wellness 101. I'm one of the hosts, JD Dubois, founder of Everyone Has a Story.
And I'm Dr. Corey Yeager. I'm one of the folks that is supportive of this chapter.
My name is Kelly Washington. I am a licensed clinical therapist, currently working at a high school in Palos Verdes, California.
And I'm Michael Walker, Director of Black Student Achievement in Minneapolis Public Schools, licensed school counselor, also principal and superintendent license as well.
And Corey, could you start us just with the basic definition on our most recent episode on our podcast, The Right Conversation? We dove into the differences of a therapist, psychologist, and psychiatrist. Could you kind of give us a very brief understanding of each of those and go into the expertise that you as an individual hold and how you got to that space?
Sure. So you say brief, JD. I struggle with brevity, so I'm working on it. So the pieces that we'll talk about are distinguished in this conversation with psychotherapist, psychologist, and psychiatrist. There are other pieces, other professional licenses, but those three are the ones that we really know. So if we start with the psychologist is a person that is at the doctoral level, so they have a doctorate, but their focus most often is assessment. So assessing mental health issues is really the primary focus. It doesn't mean they can't do other things. They can do therapeutic support, but their training is really focused on that assessment. A psychotherapist, which I am licensed as, can be at the master's level or the doctoral level. And really, a psychotherapist is focused on the specific therapeutic support. Can also do assessment, but their main focus is doing therapeutic support almost purely in terms of the nature of that psychotherapy. And the last one is a psychiatrist. So a psychiatrist is a medical doctor. So just like the doctor, if you are sick, you go to your normal doctor. They are a medical doctor like that, but they've done special training in the mental health realm. They are the only licensure that can prescribe medication. It's something that really sets the psychiatrist apart is that they can prescribe medication.
See, try to lift your computer off of that just a little bit.
Is that
See it.
better?
A little bit.
Okay. So I'm finished this focus for the next hour. So those three pieces are really the center pieces of what we hear about, talk about in mainstay everyday culture, psychologists, psychotherapists, and psychiatrists. Many times a psychotherapist is not called a psychotherapist, it's just a therapist. But that's a bit of the breakdown. Again, I would describe JD to your question. My licensure is a psychotherapist. So I'm licensed at the master's level, and I went on and got a doctorate, PhD, to really emphasize the research aspect of the importance of therapy.
And then, Mike, you have a very deep engagement in the school system. What was kind of your journey leading into that, and why did you choose the expertise that you chose as opposed to being a psychiatrist or a psychologist specifically?
Yeah, I mean, so mine's basically go back to being a high school student and whatnot, and really that when I was in school, I didn't have a counselor like meet with me about my life and what I was going to do after high school. I like to think that I was a college going student. You know, I graduated with a decent GPA. I played sports. And like I said, in high school, not one time did my counselor meet with me individually to help me like plan for my life
Throughout high school.
throughout high school. Right. So they may have came and did like classroom lessons, but they never had an individual meeting with me, which didn't give me the opportunity to like plan out what it is I wanted to do. And so that's kind of what made me want to go be a counselor, is to say that I want to make sure that the students that I come in contact with, that they have a person that's going to help them plan out their life, help them have conversations through difficult times and struggles and whatnot. And so that's why I went to be a counselor, 'cause I want to be a helper. Naturally, I had the skill set, and then going to school just gave me the technical language and some of the research and knowledge of what it was I was already naturally doing individually.
And then Kelly, very similar in terms of the school system, but journey to choosing that occupation. What kind of inspired you? Was there anyone that you saw growing up that was in that occupation, or what was the moment that you can remember? Like, okay, one, I'll be a good therapist, but two, I want to actually take those steps towards being an actual therapist.
Yeah, so I actually had no real experience with therapy growing up. I only really heard about it on TV in the ways that they described it, which usually seemed pretty intense and not something that a lot of people did. So I actually had no real interest in doing therapy. I definitely think when I was a kid, I struggled with anxiety. I can look back on it now and say that, but then I definitely didn't know that that's what it was. But when I went to school, I actually had planned to be an elementary school teacher. Tried that out as a student teacher. It was not a good fit for me. So I actually finished my bachelor's degree with no plan for what I wanted to do. I kind of made it a general major. And then after I graduated, I was kind of figuring out my game plan for moving forward and what I wanted to do. And my mom had actually suggested doing therapy. And I was like, that seems kind of like a random option. So I started to look into the master's programs, and a little premature in my decision making, I just signed up for one. So I applied for the master's program, got into it. I've always been interested in talking to people and helping people. I just didn't know exactly how I wanted to do that. So I was able to start my program, and I actually got a job then as a staff at a treatment program. So I could kind of get my feet wet when it came to mental health. And that's when I think it really solidified that that's something I wanted to do. I really enjoyed being able to help people through a really difficult time in their lives. And so fortunately it worked out for me, that kind of premature decision making. And I worked in a couple different settings now.
For you, now that you work in the school system, and you mentioned you had the ability to be a teacher for a short period of time and realize either how difficult it was or you sat in that seat. Now being the support system for those teachers, do you feel that gives you an advantage? Because when you get a student that comes into your office, you also have the other perspective of what your work can do to help the state of that classroom, so that that teacher is more comfortable or has the ability to really do their job. How does that, or if, how does it, and if it does, what role does that play?
Yeah, it definitely plays a role. I think it helps me to value the education system as a whole. And I do find that obviously very valuable. I enjoyed school. I continued going to school for a while. So I think that's definitely important. But it's cool being able to integrate mental health into that. I think people see school and mental health as completely separate entities, even though a lot of these kids are struggling and could use support, and I think would thrive in their academics or in whatever they're going into if they were able to get the mental health support that they need. So I really work with the teachers to help them be able to implement some of these techniques in their classrooms, so that it doesn't always have to be I come in and help them through something, that the teachers can be able to do that as well.
Hey, Kelly, you said something that triggers what I thought would be part of my background and training is doing therapeutic support in the school systems as well. And you said that sometimes we see them as different: mental health or mental wellness support and school academic support.
Mm-hmm.
But they are really connected, because what happens is we have the accessibility of having that student in front of us for 8 hours a day in the school setting. And if they're struggling with mental health issues, oftentimes it's going to present itself in the school setting.
Mm-hmm.
Have folks that are supporting that mental wellness journey. Not only do you have the student, but what comes along with the student is the family, right? So I think that's really, I like the way you put that.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it definitely is. Combining those two things makes a world of difference, as opposed to completely separating them.
That's right.
Yeah, and just to add on to that conversation is as we are focusing on students, sometimes we forget about some of the adults that are in our buildings, right? So even our teachers need some support around how they are handling and dealing with their own personal, emotional feelings and how they are connected to the students. And so if we don't have healthy and well educators, then we know that that will permeate into the classroom. And so now we got teachers who are impacting students in a negative way because of their own self well or personal well-being. And so, how do we support our educators as well through that process? So, I know that I do a lot of work with making sure that we support our educators in the same way that we support our students.
Mm-hmm.
And now,
It's not just one-sided.
what would be the different role, or what is the difference in role that a psychologist may play in a school setting or school system, and what a therapist plays in that same school system? What are the different things that they're focusing on, or what are their different methods of support that they give to both the adults and also the students?
So
Kelly,
at my school,
Yeah.
oh yeah, so at my school, the school psychologists focus primarily on like assessments and individualized education plans and 504s, which are different ways to support the students in the classroom, whether it's a learning disability or an emotional disturbance of some sort. Our role as therapists is more hands-on in the moment. So we see kids regularly and we have sessions throughout the week with different students, but we also have a drop-in policy. So kids can drop into our offices at any time during school and come get some support if they need it.
Scheduled or not, there's a space for them to go to if they're feeling like they need some support. They just drop in, and it's open door policy.
Yep.
Wow.
that was similar to the setup that we had when I did it as well, Kelly. And then the psychologist who was focusing on that assessment, and the therapist oftentimes work in concert.
Mhm.
The psychologist can discuss, hey, here's what I'm seeing with this young person, and then it can help us find ways in which to support therapeutically that day-to-day approach, that day-to-day engagement.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
And then, Mike, in the school system that you worked in, was there both? Each campus had psychologists and therapists on staff, or how does that? How has that worked?
Yeah, well, the school system definitely hires psychologists. We may not necessarily have our own therapists. We sometimes outsource those resources. And so
Okay.
typically how it works in our system is like the counselor is that first line of defense. So counselors can do similar work as therapists. They just can't diagnose certain aspects of students. And so the counselors kind of find out how things are going. And if there needs to be some further information or some further support, then the counselor will refer out to the mental health therapist in that way. So they definitely work in conjunction with each other to support each other and give information back and forth. So it just depends on how the school system is set up. But here in our state or in our school system, that's how we operate.
So, Doc, we kind of discussed this on the episode of the psychologist being more individual and more assessment based, and the therapist being more of a support system. Where does the psychiatrist fit in terms of the school system? And is there a difference between the roles that they may play in an underprivileged school as opposed to a more resource filled environment? And are there any differences that you've seen when you've worked with schools that have a disparity in income of the students?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. One of the focuses that the school system will struggle with is,
Try to turn your volume down on your computer a little bit. See if that helps.
you hear me?
A
So
little better.
one of the things that a school system will struggle with is Mike's point, and Kelly talked a bit about it, is that what we'll hear about oftentimes the school psychologist. People go to school specifically to become school psychologists. And if we know their focus in their training program is specifically about assessment, even though they can technically support, that's what we know and hear and utilize. So that's what you'll find in school. Sometimes outside of that school study, they will look to engage community-based agencies to come into the school to do therapeutic support. So I would describe it as a tick on a dog. So a therapist is not many times not part of the school system, but is inside of that and connected deeply to it. Psychiatrists are going to be really, to some degree, initial setting, a support mechanism. So if I'm doing work, Kelly's doing work, Mike, we're doing work with a family or an individual, but we may start to think, hey, there's some heavy duty issues here that may call for medication. In that sense, we'll then engage the psychiatrist. Many times, we have one or two psychiatrists that are specific to the school. And I would make a call out and say, hey, I have a student family here that is needing some support that may call for medication and prescription. I want to send or engage or bring this family and this individual to that psychiatrist support. All the while continuing to do that therapeutic support, if that makes sense. So you may need medication. You go to the psychiatrist and get be seen, and then now we have medication that may be part of it. But you'll continue that therapeutic support with the therapist. Now, the one thing you talked about for your question, JD, was that
You got
individualized.
you got headphones?
That,
When you're done, just put use headphones.
that individualized support oftentimes comes from that psychologist, but a therapist, for my work, a psychotherapist wants to look at a broader system, not just the individual. If I'm seeing Kelly, I want to know more about Kelly, but I also want to know more about the system that Kelly. So, what is home look like? What is your family engagement? What is your support mechanism? I want to know more about the broader system and about therapeutic support. So, a psychotherapist often wants to do that from a broad approach, where psychologists, if they're focusing with an individual, they want to really kind of hone in on, well, Kelly, tell me what's going on, and ask a lot of questions about your system. So I think those are some of the differences that we see. And laymen don't talk about that. We don't talk about that with families. Family just knows he's a school psychologist and says, well, that must be the person you need to go talk to. But there are these different layers of support. If that makes sense.
Mhm.
See, if you have some headphones, I think it'll be good for the sound. If you can plug them in.
All right.
If not. And then Kelly, I want to ask you, just in terms of your transition from teaching or going in that route of teaching to now being a therapist, how do you feel, let's say, if you knew what you do now when you were going into teaching, or if teachers could teach from a perspective of a therapist when it comes to support, how do you see that kind of bridging in terms of the understanding that, like Corey said, that these individual students come from a certain background and they have a lot of experiences that make them who they are once they step into your classroom. Are there any tips or things that come to mind when you speak to different teachers that you feel may help them in the classroom setting?
Yeah, so I think something that's big for me is recognizing the student as an individual and that they have stuff going on that I know in a classroom setting, it's obviously harder because you might have 30 students. So you being able to see them all for who they are is pretty challenging. It's a lot easier from my perspective because I'm working with them one-on-one and I get to know them and can understand where they're coming from better. But something that I definitely try to focus on with teachers is kind of seeing the student for who they are. That a lot of times, even the most problematic student, deep down, they have a good heart or they have qualities that could be really beneficial, but nobody is allowing them to show those qualities. And they're just seeing that surface level, you're disruptive or you're angry or you're frustrating in class, which is absolutely would be frustrating as a teacher. And if I'm in that position, it is hard. But I think trying to really like step aside and see, okay, what's maybe going on? Something is causing you to act out in class. Because if you're getting in trouble constantly, that's not, even if you think it's funny or don't really care, nobody wants to be in trouble all the time or for people to talk down to them or belittle them. And so if that's happening, you have to say, okay, maybe there's something else to this. It's not just a fun game of I'm in the office again or I got called out in class again. You know, nobody actually enjoys that.
Oh, no, that's interesting because on our podcast we talked about a situation for me where middle school area where me and a couple of my friends were exactly what you just said, talking, getting in trouble, but it wasn't based off of necessarily that we were bad kids. We were just going through a lot all at the same time and didn't understand how to communicate that to someone. But we also didn't have an adult that was aware or that knew what to do with the fact that the teachers know that their students passing away. The teachers know that we live in an area or grow up in an area where there's a lot of violence and a lot of things going on, but they didn't have the resources or the understanding um, of exactly what you're saying, that each individual student is literally an individual that comes from a certain environment that affects their behavior. And sometimes they're in class and their behavior is a byproduct of the pain that they may dealing
Mm.
with at home. And you just see it as kids in the back talking. And
Yep.
Doc, I'd love you to touch on kind of the example you used in terms of how they approached us and how a lot of teachers approach those kids and just kind of cast them off as, oh, they don't care, they don't listen. And then with the therapeutic understanding, how you could also address the same exact issue in the same exact classroom, but address them differently and from a more therapeutic standpoint.
Yeah, I think you hit on something that Mike talked about a little bit earlier. Is that if we're not supporting the teachers and the support mechanisms in the school setting, and as well as the student, then it can be a struggle. Oftentimes, we have to realize that the adults in the building are struggling with how to address these issues. They don't know. They don't know what to do. So now all of a sudden, I'm sitting in the classroom. I've got JD and his friend who are bright kids, but now they're talking more and struggling more. And one of their friends has been shot and killed. As an adult, I'm saying, I don't know what to say to JD in this school. So what will I tend to do? I want to get him out of my classroom. I don't know what else to do. I just want to get him out of here because they're disrupting everything. But not having a deeper understanding of what JD and his friends went through and are going through is part of the struggle. So finding ways, Mike and I have done quite a bit of work to the teachers and the support systems that they need training on recognizing the issues. It's one of the things that the school council are doing. I'll have Mike talk more about this. But having that recognition in place, understanding what those issues may look like, and then matching that struggle with some adult that has a level of awareness on how to support that. That's what you asked about, Eddie. That awareness, I think, is a critical aspect. How do I become aware? And then there's the next step. It's one thing to be aware of the struggle. It's another thing to be able to address that. And those licensed folks in the therapeutic, psychological realm are trained to do that, and they should be working in concert. So the therapist, the school counselor, the school psychologist, the outside support of a psychiatrist should all be working in concert to support that young person. Now, if we support that young person, it's a beautiful thing. But they also come from a family and a community that may be, right? If we're not understanding and becoming aware of that broader struggle, we'll miss elements of how to support a kid.
Mm.
We have to do that holistic. I know JD, you talk about, I know Mike, you talk a lot about that holistic approach. So I don't want to just support part of the student. I want to support the holistic aspect of the student. And it's no different than what we do in our work that I do in the NBA. We have to support holistically who that player is, not just a player on the court. But they are a young man that has other struggles that come along with it. And they come from a family unit and a community and a neighborhood that also informs how they see the world and how they will experience their struggle. So that holistic approach is important. And maybe Mike, a little more about that. JD, but Mike, if you want to touch more on that.
Yeah, I mean, you guys hit a lot of the different points, but one thing that hasn't been shared about is something that we know in education is there's a dearth of like black males in our educational system. And so how do we know, or how are we setting our young people up to be able to have people that they can actually communicate with and talk to who understands their story? So you may have situations where there's young black men who are in these spaces and going through these trials and tribulations, but when they look to people at school, nobody looks like them. Nobody has had that experience. So the likelihood of me sharing that experience is very slim. right? And so then how do we get more people who look like them into these positions and into these spaces? I talked about my experience about being in high school. Well, I didn't have a black counselor in my high school, right? My school was probably about 35% students of color at the time that I went there. So the likelihood of them calling me down and seeing me as something that's valuable is very slim, right? To understand my story and my perspective. And so one of the things is that I wanted to be in these spaces because I want them to see a person that looked like them, right? I want them to have a real model of an actual person that they can see that comes from their community, that's still walking around in their community while they're trying to deal with these same trials and tribulations that I'm dealing with right now or that I have dealt with throughout my time. And so, like, we sometimes don't put enough emphasis on how important that aspect of it is for our students.
Mm-hmm. Hey, JD, you got my body moving over here.
You see me, I'm all over the place.
And that's a great question, and I'll touch on it, and then let Kelly and Mike go take it further. One of the struggles that our school systems have, and not just our school systems, but broader society has, is that if you don't see me as someone that could be your nephew, if you don't see me as someone that can be your uncle, then the propensity to hire you and bring you in is much lower. I'm probably going to reach out to those circumstances and those groups that remind me of my upbringing, even though my upbringing is quite different than yours, especially if the dramatic difference in black and white. So if we look at school systems, most teachers and principals are white, but many of the students that they support are not. So when the hiring opportunities come along, they may look at the school psychologist and find someone that they know or that looks like them, that is trained and has all the licenses that are needed, and say this person will be a good fit. As opposed to saying it's probably important to look for someone, especially that's from the community that we're representing, that we're centered in. If that school is centered in North Minneapolis, finding someone like Mike that is from the community but is licensed as a counselor is critically important because to JD, your point, even if I look like you and you bring me in and you've never seen me, especially in a moment of trauma, in a moment that the issues are flying everywhere, I'm not talking to you. I don't care who you are, but having those people around consistently, to what Kelly does that, right? She's around consistently. So when situations occur, they're like, I haven't talked to Kelly before, but I see her all the time.
Seen her, yeah.
Right? Right, she's
Yeah.
familiar, familiar face. So I'll let the two of them go, but I think it's a critical question that you asked, JD, and it's something that we should be discussing more and more within our systems.
Yeah, I'll jump in and just say a couple things about that is really the piece about is how do I deposit relational money into the bank before something ever happens, right? If we're only waiting till something happens to start having conversation and dialogues, we're way too late because now there's no, like you said, they don't see us as valuable. They don't see us as part of the community. They're like, I'm not talking to this guy because I've never talked to him before. So how do I make connections early and often, right? When I'm seeing them
And
in the hallway,
on
go
top
ahead.
of that, the title you hold is already uncomfortable for me. So the
Correct.
fact that you're labeled a therapist, I'm already like, whoa, if you was just a PE teacher, I might be more likely to, oh, yeah, Mr. Such and such or coach. But I'll let you continue.
No, so that's why you got to do those relationship pieces early on. So then the title drops. And now they
Yeah.
just see you as either Coach Walker or Michael Walker, whatever it is. You've dropped that title, and now they see you for who you are, and you got some skills that can help them along their journey, right? The other piece around hiring practices, we have to be very intentional when we have the opportunity to hire these positions, right? So one thing that I have implemented in the department that I oversee is that we have community-based interviews. And so what that means is we hold the interview in the community, and then when we're at the local community spot, we also have people ask questions to that person, right? I need to see. I don't care what the answer is, right? That's not really what I'm trying to go for in this respect. I'm trying to see, like what Corey just said, how your body movement when you're talking to the Black community. Are you nervous? Are you fearful? Can you hold a dialogue and conversation with this community? Because if you're scared of the community, you can't really work with us or you can't work with our babies, right? So I'm going to put you in a situation where you have to be able to respond. We have students that sit on our panel as well when we do interviews. I want to see what their
Me.
perspective is because they are the ones that's going to deal with this adult more often than I am, right?
Yeah.
So if they don't get a good vibe from this adult, we're not going to be able to bring this adult into our organization to be able to support you. So I make sure that the people who we're going to be supporting have a bigger voice than just me or my team that's working in that department. But that's thinking outside the box, and you sometimes have to go up against some of the traditional HR policies in order to do some of those things. But to me, that's the right thing to do if we're trying to make changes within our educational system.
I think you're muted.
You muted, see?
I said Mike is preaching on Sunday. It's Sunday. That was preaching. That's exactly the point. I'll let Kelly move on. But that is the point. How are we engaging, supporting, and becoming aware of what our community is in need of? Because our babies are coming from that community. And JD, you said it, and I'll hand it to Kelly. JD, you said even the title that is utilized. As I moved into the work in the NBA with the Pistons, one of the things that our head coach Casey said is, hey, what title do you want? Well, I don't want to be called a psychotherapist. I want to be a life coach because that's what I'm doing. We need coaches for different things. So that even the language you use in that title, critical. Kelly, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, you're fine. So that actually comes into play a lot at my school. So there aren't therapists in schools. We know that it's not super common. We work for an outside agency that's placed in the schools, but we are actually considered student support specialists as a way to, even though that's still confusing for the kids, they don't know what that is. But I think it helps them to not feel like, oh, I'm going to see a therapist. Because sometimes I'll have kids talk to me for almost an hour, and at the end, they're like, oh my gosh, this felt like therapy, sorry. And I'm like, well, I am a therapist, but I think it's important to build those relationships. And then I do like to be clear with them that this is therapy. So they also have that perspective of therapy isn't that bad. It's not that you have to lay down on a couch and talk about your childhood all the time, that it could just be two people going back and forth and talking about how you had a hard time in your math class today. And we can kind of destigmatize it that way, where we have to really make ourselves present on the school campus so that kids do know that this is a resource. We talk to a lot of the incoming students. We have lots of presentations, so they're able to see, okay, this is a valuable resource that we can use. And it's not something that's weird or uncomfortable. Like, they're just people that you can come talk to. And I think that's really huge for them feeling like, okay, I can go talk about the stuff that I have going on.
Kelly, to your point, before you go, JD, just to quickly to your point, Kelly, one thing that I'm always saying in all of my work, that therapy should feel like a conversation, right? The stigma that surrounds therapy for anyone, but specifically Black and Brown communities, the stigma of, I'm not going to have you calling me crazy. I'm not going to be doing that therapy thing. But yeah. I've had so many young people and their families say, this is what therapy is once I've engaged therapeutically. This is what I thought therapy would be. Therapy should be an engagement of conversation and awareness. And if we can, as therapists, as the licensed folks, match the language of our students or whoever we're working with, that it should sound like everyday communications in my home, even though we're licensed and we have all kinds of research that is moving, but it should sound like a conversation that you have every day. I think
Absolutely.
that's critically important.
Especially working with young people, I think adults are more inclined to reach out and see a therapist sometimes if they're needing support. But teenagers, it's very rare that they're saying, "Oh, I'd like to go talk to the therapist at school." But like you said, when you're able to engage with them in that way, they're much more likely to want to come, even just pop in, because they know, okay, I'm going to probably feel good after talking to this person. It's not going to be weird. They're not going to diagnose me with something. It's not going to be that I have to get on medication suddenly. It just means, hey, you were having a really hard day, and that's normal. I had a bad day yesterday myself. So it is what it is, and I think that's really important.
That's right.
Yeah, I just want to add on, how do we have different spaces where we do quote unquote therapy? Like, I like to do my stuff around sports, right? So I may have a kid in the gym that we're just talking while we shooting basketball, and that's counseling, right? Or I may have a kid that we're just walking up and down the hallway during lunchtime having a conversation. We have to get the stigma that you have to come into an office space in order to have those types of conversations. So I think that's where students and other folks get kind of like, I'm not trying to do that. But if you can make it be normalized by doing it in everyday activities, it makes people more apt and willing to do that. And we see that a lot in our work, is that our students come to us all the time. As Corey said, we call ourselves life coaches, is what we are, just to get that stigma out of the way, because we know what kind of weight that carries in the Black community, for sure.
That's right.
It's interesting to hear you guys the similar topic of the definition of therapy and how certain environments that we don't even understand is a therapeutic engagement is therapy. I remember a group of friends just sitting around and people are sharing intimate stories about things that they've dealt with, and other people in that group are giving them some support and saying that, I'm sorry that happens. How have you healed through that? What are some things that you've worked through? And it was what would be probably under definition group therapy. But for the people sitting there, they may not have ever even considered going to see a therapist.
Yeah.
But they just, if you could label that feeling as that's the same thing that therapy is with different therapists, it gives people a different idea of what that means. And the second thing that I had a question on is when you guys discuss the process of choosing a therapist or psychological support at a campus, if that process isn't done correctly and it's not we're not choosing someone that is for that community specifically, it's just, okay, you got the writings on the wall and resume looks good, okay, let's put you in the underprivileged school because you have all these accolades. And now we get someone who is dealing with kids that they don't have any relationships with, they don't have any understanding. Do you think that plays a role into why it's much quicker that they send our kids to see a psychiatrist to get medication? Because I don't have the understanding of what you're dealing with, so I'm not going to spend as much time or as many sessions dissecting what's going on. Man, I understand. I know this is going on. I know this is tough. Understanding what Mike is saying, I might want to go shoot with you today and have the same conversation. I might want to walk down the hall with you and have the same conversation. But now that you come to my office 3 times and the third time you're worse, quote unquote, than you were because the environment isn't comfortable. I'm not making you comfortable. And now I'm saying, you know what? I can't help you. Let me send you to such and such and give you a prescription. I just want to hear you guys' thoughts on that.
Yeah, I mean, there's a term. There's a set of 3 terms that we use a lot when we come in when students come from communities that are underserved, underprivileged, and overdiagnosed. The
Say
struggle:
that again.
underserved,
Yep.
underprivileged, and overdiagnosed.
Hmm.
Right. So those 3 pieces coming together in concert are a battle for keeping the stigma about mental wellness and engaging mental wellness, and avoiding that process. Because JD, you bring up a great point that there's a lot of really good research on the overdiagnosis that occurs with Black and Brown students, that
Absolutely.
will quickly move to diagnose them and use heavier diagnoses than is needed. The work that we do, the Mike helped develop in Minneapolis public schools was about avoiding the diagnosis. Many times the student doesn't, I don't care what the diagnosis is. I need somebody to talk to. So the metaphor, the analogy that I use is if we're having relationship issues as a young person, one of the very first things that you're going to do when you have a relationship issue is turn to a friend. And why are you turning to a friend? Because I need to get this out. I need to get these struggles out. But I know that my friend can't fix this issue. But I feel better anytime I engage in conversation with them. I feel better. Why? Because you're relieving pressure around that issue, right? So that overdiagnosis is an issue that we struggle with. And it goes back to this portion of hiring practices, how we're bringing people in, who we're bringing in, and why we're bringing them in. All critical elements. But I know Kelly had something, or Mike, but go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that definitely comes into play at the school system as well, that I'm qualified to diagnose kids with my licenses, but typically at school we don't. If they are looking for a diagnosis, maybe for an individualized education plan, they'll refer them to an outside therapist to cover that. But I think it's nice to kind of take that weight off of it, that there is no need for me diagnosing you with something. What you need more than anything is support. And for me to meet you where you're at, even if I don't totally understand a kid's upbringing or what they've been through, or I can't relate myself, me just hearing them out and asking questions and being honest to say, I'm not familiar with that, but can you tell me more about it? Yeah. I think most people just want to feel heard and feel validated. And so if we're able to do that, everything else aside, diagnosing aside, medication aside, we can support them better because they're just feeling heard. Like what JD said, sometimes talking to your friends is basically a therapy session. Yeah. Because I'm not necessarily, even with my education, I'm not necessarily doing anything crazy in session that's making it like, wow, I needed to talk to you. I'm like, technically, a lot of people could have given you this same feedback. I'm meeting you where you're at. I'm not going to give you all of this really intense information if that's not what you can receive right now.
And Kelly, and then I'm going to hand it to Mike, but Kelly, this is the concept of becoming and remaining person-centered in your approach. All right, so I'll let Mike talk more about it because I know that's the type of therapeutic and counseling support that he utilizes, but allowing each individual to be the expert in their lives. That, to be quite clear, the only expert in Kelly Washington's life is Kelly Washington. The only person that will ever be an expert on her life is her. So if we go into that engagement, not professionally, but relationally, that knowing Kelly's got the answers to her journey and probably what she's looking for, our job as folks that are supporting is to be the facilitator of awareness. That's all we're doing. Awareness facilitators.
Meaning?
My job is to facilitate, to help move forward awareness in your life. That as I listen to the story that JD brings forward, I'm trying to put the puzzle pieces together in a way that maybe has never happened for JD. And if I have aha moments, I've helped to facilitate an awareness of what JD is dealing with. And then JD can say, I never thought of it that way. Actually, no one's put it that way, but you're exactly right. Now JD walks away from our conversation more aware of himself than he was when he entered the conversation. But I saw Mike moving. I know he got. Go ahead.
Ain't nothing else to say. You hit every point on that. I mean, that's the philosophy that I go with, person centered, and so it's always about how do we listen to the student or the adult to find out what it is that their needs are, right? And so it's really about, am I asking the right questions to get out the information and then regurgitating that information right back to them so they can hear what they have said and then posing different cons and pros to those different situations so they can make the best decision for themselves. It's not about us making decisions for them, but helping them make the best decision for themselves by showing them both sides of the table. And so it's really about listening.
And JD, I've watched and listened to you as a coach do something quite similar. Obviously, you're not trying to do therapeutic support as you're coaching players, but that holistic approach and the way you engage is allowing and supporting the expertise that that young person has in their experience and discussing that. And not only discussing it, but capturing that information and bringing it back into play when it makes most sense. Could be a week later that you make reference to a conversation that you had with a player 2 weeks previous, and how that expertise in their life is facilitating awareness.
I think the one thing for me that allows me to connect with the players is exactly what you say. Always trying to interrelationally and coach from a holistic standpoint, meaning um, I'm trying to get to know the individual as a person, as a whole, first and foremost. Before we can talk about team structure, role, skill set, I need to understand who you are, how you communicate, what type of environment you've come from. And then once I get to know you in that space and there's a sense of trust there, now I can teach you whatever it is that Coach Case wants you to learn. If there's ever any struggles, our foundation is built off of me understanding who you are, not just
Mm-hmm.
me understanding how well you play or how well you need to play. Because if I think the foundation is solely basketball, when there are moments, and every player has them, where personal life struggles or even on the floor struggles collide with your expectations and your thoughts, if you don't feel like this coach or this person's foundation is built on you as an individual and it's only built on the positive performance, they don't usually, or a lot of times, they don't feel as comfortable seeking support or understanding if the foundation hasn't been built that you are concerned with them from an individual relational standpoint. And I think that that's something that, as a player, I really connected to. And then as a coach, I really try to be intentional about that approach on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
While y'all talking about coaching, being a high school coach, being a counselor has made me be a better high school coach because I come with that holistic approach to the team. I'm not just focusing on what's happening on the basketball court, right? I'm connecting with my young guys outside of basketball because once I know who they are, then I have the ability to know how to challenge them as well, right? Because everybody can't be challenged in the same form or fashion. You have to know what different people's pulls and triggers are so that you can make sure that you're getting the best out of them. And so that's really important to me, is to talk to them about stuff outside of basketball, get to know who they are. Now I can utilize that relationship within the game of basketball. You know what I mean? So I definitely have become a better basketball coach based on my philosophy on counseling.
And that actually just brought up for me that idea of building the foundation so that you can appropriately challenge them. Because if you understand them better and understand where they're coming from, then you can feel more comfortable saying, just challenging them on whatever perspective they're holding on to, not necessarily based on my opinion of it, but if that situation or that scenario is serving you. If it's not, then I want to challenge you, but I've really got to build that base first, especially with young people. For me to come in as a stranger and challenge all of these beliefs that you have and all of these things that you've held on to for a long time, that's not going to go anywhere, and they're not going to want to keep talking to me,
Kelly,
or they're going to shut down.
Kelly, one thing that I've found, and I know JD and Mike, we've talked to some degree about this previous, is that we can ask people for permission to challenge them. But we can be in this conversation right now, and we can push back. But if you can ask for that permission, most people will give you the permission because they're curious about what you're going to add, what you're going to push them on. So, hey, JD, can I push back and challenge you? Is it all right if I challenge you a little bit on what you just said? JD is probably going to say yes because he wants to hear what that challenge may be. So just even that small move of asking for permission to challenge can open the door to facilitating more deep found and more profound awareness.
And when you built that rapport with them, I think then they understand your intentions, that me challenging you isn't to say that I think something's wrong with you or I don't like you or I want you to be different. If you've built that rapport, then me saying, is it okay if I challenge you on this? They're not defensive about it. They understand, well, I get that you're coming from a place of caring about me because you've shown that you care about me and you have good intentions. And I think that goes a long way.
So how could we
and Kelly,
no, go ahead, Mike. How couldn't we how couldn't we use that in the realm of sports as well. That asking for that permission, supporting them in the ways that they need to open the door towards that awareness. Go ahead, Mike.
No, I was just going to say, and that's what we have to be giving to our teachers in our school systems, right? How to give them that skill set to build that relationship so they can challenge our students academically in the classroom from a space and a place of care, right? Because sometimes we challenge with just, I'm just going to challenge you hard. There's this term the research talk about as being a warm demander, right? And what that really is focused on is saying, how do I build a positive relationship with you so that I can demand more of you? So I'm
Mm-hmm.
still going to have high expectations of you, but it's going to be based in care. And the way we set that care up is by me connecting with you on a personal level and then saying, hey, so I know you're a better math student than this, Michael. So how can I make sure that you get this better grade? Because you ain't giving me your all right here. And now Michael can say, you know what, you're right, Mr. Such and Such. I'm gonna come after school and get these extra 10 minutes of support from you because you called me out in a way that made me feel like you care about me and that you value me and you see more for me. Too often we just say, hey boy, you can finish that work. You know how to do better than that. Now get it done. There's no care within that. It's just barking orders, right? And that's what we have to avoid. So how do we give the teachers the skill set to be able to do what we are naturally doing as counselors or
So,
therapists?
Mike, I've seen you do it, but talk a little bit about how you utilize that warm demand outside of the academic setting and more on the court. How are you using that warm demand, or is there a scenario? So I know that you've coached at a high level with AAU with Pulley, and you've had big time players come through that process. Have you been able to use that warm demand with players?
Yeah, some of the big time players that come through, they ain't really need my coaching though. They was already cold. But the piece about that is what having those players, you talk about like Tyus Jones, Trey Jones, Gary Trent Jr., Royce White, right? Those guys that came through, is that I had a positive relationship with them. So when I saw them doing certain things on the court, I could say, hey, so did you get the result that you wanted from that move or that play that you did? And now we can have a dialogue and conversation about it, saying, so why don't you try this other option or think about it from this standpoint? And then now they come back and say, oh, I like that, right? And now they want more of it, and then it's less like I have to give it to them. They come and ask for it, right? But sometimes that can be difficult, right? You have some players that are not going to be willing to listen and learn and hear what you have to say. So you got to do a little bit of more work. And some of that work has to be definitely outside. So how are you setting up individual meetings with some of your players? How are you, one thing we have this like group band app that we use. And I text them individually through that saying, hey, so what's your goals for tomorrow night's game? Like, what is your goals? Like, what do you want to accomplish in the game tomorrow night? So he'll tell me his goals, and then at halftime, I'm saying, hey, dog, you said you want to have 7 offensive rebounds. All you got is 2 in the first half. So now I'm challenging you. You got to get 5 in the second half if you want to hit the goal that you set for yourself. Not what I set, it's what you set. So now I'm holding them accountable for the goals that they have set. And so we do individual goals that I have with my players, but also we have like team goals before each and every game that we go over that we're trying to accomplish. And so they know that at halftime, I'm gonna go over there and talk about where we are at in our goals, and then I'm gonna demand more of them. So how are we gonna make sure we hold them to 28 points this half? Because right now they scored way too many points than what we want for the entire game.
Mm-hmm.
But that takes time. That takes building relationships. That's doing stuff outside of basketball. Like we did some kind of retreats with my players before the season, where we had referees come in and talk to them, explain to them how to communicate with the officials, how to carry themselves when officials make calls that are questionable, so that they don't get teased. And then we just did some fun stuff. Ate some pizza. Did some whatever you want to call it, but just team building type activities outside of basketball to build that connection.
Mm-hmm.
And before we get into the questions from the viewers, the last thing kind of to close out our group discussion that I was interested in is knowing what we all know as a group and how the school system is set up in terms of the utilization of a therapist, psychologist, and psychiatrist. If we were in the decision making position, how would we structure how we utilize those three when it comes to our community's school system? What do we feel um, is could be the most effective or efficient way to utilize those three different expertise to best support our communities and our school
Yeah,
systems?
and I'll start off and be brief with it. I'm gonna try to be brief. What we must do is put those people that are support mechanisms, those three that you talked about, psychologists, therapists, psychiatrists, making sure that they have a relational bond and understanding amongst them as people that will be teammates in supporting the young people in that school setting. I think all too often we leave it to chance that hopefully it'll just kind of work out. And many times it does, but too often it does not. So being intentional and methodical with those support pieces um, within those three, and how that they will attack that support of players and students, I think is something that we do. We don't want to leave it to chance. We want to be intentional about that approach, and I don't think we do that well at this point. So we want to be honed in on that process.
Yeah,
I think
I
it would
definitely.
be
Oh, okay, Kelly.
so I think it would be helpful if there was a therapist at every school. On some level, I know that sometimes like our therapists will bounce from school to school. The high school therapists stay on campus, but the middle schools go to different schools. But I think that would be the first step, is actually having that mental health support on campus. Although it's good to have the ability to refer to outside agencies, I think the kids are more likely to use the services when it's readily available. Trying to schedule an outside session when they've got sports and extracurriculars and homework is unlikely. But if that person is on campus and in between classes, or when they've got some downtime in a class, they can just pop over to the office and talk to someone, I think that's a game changer. And then also, I think valuing mental health at a higher level at the school system, that obviously the education part is the priority because you're at school. But I think if you can raise the value of mental health, not necessarily that it's aligned with the academic part, but pretty close, I think is key. Not that it should take over for class time or instruction time, but that is valued in the same way. Because again, like I said before, the kid can be phenomenal academically, be doing great in all these areas. And if their mental health isn't right, then they're just not going to be as successful as they could be. So I think valuing those, and then like Corey said, really making sure that you're intentional in having a system created with the psychologist and the therapist and outside agencies as needed for a psychiatrist, really making sure all of those are come together.
Yep, I mean, I agree with both of them, what they're shared, and I would just add that having that holistic approach is definitely important. When I mean holistic approach, I'm saying how does every member on that team is aware of what's being done with all the students that are involved? Because again, each one of us will have different relationships with students, and we may have a better relationship with certain students. So how do I take the lead with this student and this family to support them in ways that they need? It doesn't. We should not be territorial about what our roles and titles are. We should be making sure that we are benefiting the young people that are there. The other piece is about having that team, is that how do we have folks who are not necessarily quote unquote licensed in that space? So how do we utilize some of our other staff members who are in the building, who may not be a licensed teacher or a licensed counselor, but have great insight to that community and how that community operates, so that we don't walk into those spaces with our biases and predicting and having situations happen that you said earlier where, well, I never come from this community, so I'm just going to refer out right away. No, let's get some other people on that team that can understand and give those counselors, those therapists, a little bit of insight to how this community works before we just go out and refer out to psychiatrists and whatnot. So those are kind of the things that I would add to what Doc Yeager said and Miss Kelly said.
And to that, to both of your points, we talk about the stigma that surrounds mental health, especially in the Black and Brown community. And if we know that that stigma is in place, then what we tend to do is shy away from mental health, mental wellness support, because we don't see it as important in the academic realm. In sports, we do the same thing. What's most important is what you do on the field or on the court. But realizing that there are other pieces that play into who you are on the court. So that stigma can be diminished if we start to use that cornerstone approach of how important it is to be mentally well, so you can be productive as an academic, so you can be productive as a basketball player. That using that cornerstone of mental health and mental wellness let that be seen as just as important. Because what we know, to Kelly's point, if I'm not mentally well, the chances that I maintain a 3.7 GPA is diminishing return because I'm struggling with something from my community, the death of a friend. We see it all the time that when young people have traumatic experiences, they could be a straight A student. The next semester, they have two B's, a C, and one A. What has happened is that the trauma has impacted their ability academically, that I can't even remain or become academically well because I'm psychologically deficient, right? So seeing that is critical.
And I know we're about to close real quick with JD, but I just want to just throw a plug in that, like right now, doing what's going on with this COVID-19 situation, we are having a lot of students who are going to be struggling, and academics is going to is maybe see an area where we see may decrease for some of these students and families because they have bigger pressing issues on their mind. And so how do we as educators lead with grace and be mindful about what world we are living in right now, and how do we not necessarily lower the expectations, but have some differentiated expectations for our students and families during this distance learning time, because this is very important right
And
now.
athletics, basketball, in that realm is exactly the same. That you're going to ask for players to get back into the rhythm of sports, but everything that has coincided with this COVID-19 and the anxiety surrounding it and the depression surrounding it, that all of a sudden the demand is for you to get back into the rhythm athletically, but these pieces must be addressed at the same time, parallel approach. That I want you to be good in this realm, but I want to make sure that I support you in this realm so they can coincide.
And our first question was, how do both teachers and coaches who struggle building relationships, how do they improve on that? They're trying to get some structure on how to improve the ability to build those relationships. Are there any tips that lead to relationships more likely to just genuinely
One
happen?
thing that we can do, JD, is recognize that we are the strategy that is needed. Us individually, I am the strategy that is needed to be supportive and engage that player or that student. So that's one strategy, is recognizing that I have the ability to build relationships. Now that doesn't mean I lead with being a great relationship person, but if I understand how I am relationally, how I start relationships, how I engage, I understand that version of myself. So doing the reflective work of how I can be helpful and build relationships in my way. I cannot do it in Mike's way. I can't do it in Kelly's way or JD's. I must do it in Corey's way. So having the recognition that I may not be great at something, but I can be good at building those relationships. And the byproduct of that is the support. It's my thought.
And I think taking sometimes the pressure off of this need to have a really good relationship with somebody, I think we can get to know somebody by asking them questions, sometimes personal stuff, trying to be mindful of boundaries and things like that, but really just asking them questions about themselves, but also not needing, like, if I don't get more information, then I'm not doing a good job. Sometimes I've felt like I'm making zero progress with this kid. They are not receptive to me, but I'm not going to try so hard to make them open up. I let them figure it out when they're ready to. And then typically at some point, they'll feel like, okay, there's no pressure here. I can talk to you about this. But if my intention is I have to get you to feel comfortable and want to talk to me, I'm going to probably make it weird. And it's going to be too much pressure on them to have to open up. But typically the teachers and coaches that relate the most to students or athletes are the ones who take the pressure off, and you just get to know them and you ask them questions. And if they don't want to answer, so be it. But they can see, okay, this feels comfortable. I want to open up to you, as opposed to you're asking me a lot of stuff and I have to open up to you.
And being curious, Kelly, that's about being curious, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I would say a couple of small things is that, and teachers hear this all the time. Are you greeting your students at the door? When you're greeting your students at the door, can you make small little conversations? Are you in the hallway during passing time to just communicate with students on a small level that can have huge impacts later? Another thing is, are you making those positive phone calls home to families? So as an educator, if I make positive phone calls home to family, you have to realize that that parent is going to say something to that child. And that child will come to school and say, uh-oh, Mr. Walker called my house and did something different. So I may not have a direct connection with relationship, but now the student sees me as a positive person in their life that have called about a positive thing. The other piece is, how do we create opportunities in our classroom for the class to be relational, right? So are there tricks and trades where we can have questions of the day that talks about things that kids can bring their true authentic selves into the space and share with each other? But now you've created this classroom effect of relationship, even though it wasn't you individually. So there's different tricks and trades that we can use to support this relational thought process where we don't have to be a great relational person individually.
The next question was in regards to the family structure not being as receptive or understanding of this psychological support and therapy, but um, how do they figure out how to either discuss the conversation that they may want to seek help or still seek help maybe outside of the family structure, even though they know maybe in their household that conversation isn't necessarily talked about or something that is promoted in their household, but they're reading and trying to figure out how, as an individual, how do they balance those two while still trying to receive some psychological support.
Yeah. The thing that comes to mind for me with that is this concept that we talked about earlier, is matching the language of the individual or the group that you're talking with and seeking to support. That if you can match that language and speak and sound like them, they're more prone to carry that back home in a positive way. And then parents may, if they hear their young person coming home with a positive endeavor encounter, um, the chances that they may lean into saying, yeah, let's have you do more of that increases. So I think it may sound small or seem small, but matching the language, I think, is one critical cornerstone and approach to being able to push back on the stigma that surrounds this psychological piece. If I sound like a doctoral level therapist saying, "So JD, have a seat. I'd like you to explain to me a little more about the struggles that you are presenting," a kid doesn't want to hear that, and a parent, the family, they don't want to hear that. But if I say, "Hey JD, you struggling, man? Hey, so you lost? Tell me a little bit more about your boy, and how's that affecting you?" The kids more, it's going to hear you. Then they can carry that message home, and tote that water home in a way that says, I like talking to Doc Yeager. It was good. It felt good." Because we got to have, especially with young people, we have to have family support. Mom and dad have to say yes that you can go ahead with this therapy thing. So you're not only trying to buy support for that young person, but you need the family to have a frame and understanding on what it is you'll be up to and why this is important for their student.
And I've definitely tried to help kids to see also kind of to empower themselves to recognize that, yes, as a teenager or a young person, you're going to have some limitations. If the reality is that your family is not on board, if you're able to still see me at school, then great. But if they're not really on board or they're not being supportive, that you still have the right to empower yourself and work towards that. If that's not necessarily going to therapy at the moment, but maybe still, reading different things or learning about mental health or things like that, and still kind of pushing for that if they're able to. Because a lot of my students, their parents aren't necessarily on board, but they're not against it. They're just not really giving them the support with it, but they can still kind of empower themselves to say, this is important to me to still work on this stuff. Regardless of if anyone in my family agrees or sees the value in it, I find this beneficial for myself in my future, and I'm still going to push towards that. That it doesn't have to be if my parents say that it's a good idea, then it's a good idea, because some parents just aren't going to get on board. Ideally, at some point they're able to, but if not, then I think empowering them to see that, okay, I can still kind of figure things out for myself. And as I get older and more independent, if this is something that's valuable to me, it's something I'm going to do.
and they get to advocate for themselves, right?
Mm-hmm.
If something feels good and it feels like it's helpful for me, I get to take that back home and advocate with my parents who may be in the middle. I don't know if I'm with it. I don't necessarily, I'm not against it, but now the young person can begin to advocate for the support they need.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I definitely agree with what both Corey and Kelly said. But I would just add just this one thing that one of my good friends talked to me about and shared is that mental health is just like physical health. We have people sign up to go to like Lifetime Fitness and work on their physical health and working out. We have to treat mental health the same way. We just got to go sometimes talk to people and let those things out. So how do we normalize the process of mental health like we have normalized the process of physical health? And so that's kind of what I would share with people is trying to normalize that process. At the same time, being more able to mimic the language of the people that are in front of us so that they make sure that they feel like we are speaking their language and we're not talking above them or below them, but matching who they are and where they're coming from.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last question is based around rebuilding trust. So from two standpoints, a friendship that bond was really tight, and then there were some circumstances that caused that friendship to end, and now trying to figure out how to rebuild trust with the current friends that you have and new friends that you meet. And the second piece of that is relationally. Um, Being in a relationship for a certain amount of time, trust is broken. Uh, what are some pieces of advice or tips on how to rebuild trust in both of those situations, or is it trust in general? Whatever you guys think on that.
Yeah, the first thing that comes to mind for me, JD, on that is anytime that you're in relationship, recognizing that both parties must be fed for the relationship to continue on. That it can't be one-sided. That I feel like I'm getting fed, but I know I'm not helping feed that other person. That's when relationships begin to dissolve. The other piece to that point is that in relationships we must always remain committed to repair. We know that there are going to be issues that occur relationally. It's just the nature of humanity. But if we encounter traumatic struggles or relational issues, if both sides of the relationship are committed to repair that, then we can move forward. It cannot be one sided, it can't be a one way road. So, recognizing both that commitment to repair and my role in that repair. What is my role? Part of the role in rebuilding trust is, first of all, admitting what my role was in the struggle, right? Too often we don't want to admit to our role, what part we played in whatever that issue is that's presenting itself. But if we can own our issue, our part of the struggle, and be committed to stay with that, the repair can occur. I think those are pieces that come to mind for me.
And and the other part, Doc, that they were asking as well is when one relationship ends, and how do you find a way to trust again
Yeah.
on the next
So
relationship or
so
friendship?
so to carry over, I think the human condition calls for carryover in struggles. So if I struggle in this previous relationship and I that relationship dissolves and I start to engage in a new relationship, too often what we do is we carry the burdens and struggles that we had in those previous relationships. We almost start to expect that you're going to do some of the same things, which means I'm not going to give you a chance to be genuinely who you are. I'm almost going to self sabotage the relationship because I'm looking for the previous issues to show up in you. And the person that has no idea what your previous struggles were starts to look at it like, why are you mad? Why are you getting upset with me? I didn't do anything. Well, it's because I'm bringing that old baggage into the new relationship. So recognizing what that old baggage is and working every day not to hook that baggage onto the new relationship, right? I think that's something that's that intentional methodical piece, understanding it and pushing back against hooking those old issues into the new.
And I think that commitment part is huge. I think if you're both agreeing to move forward past whatever the situation must have been, that you both agree that you're going to move forward. If one person is always holding on to the other thing, it's fair to have feelings about it and we can't just erase our memories. But if we're agreeing that we're going to move forward, then we have to be willing to give them the benefit of the doubt. Yes, I haven't been able to trust you in the past, but if we're going to do this together, I'm committing to trust you. I'm then giving you the benefit of the doubt that I will be able to trust you and that you will be honest with me. But I think a lot of people get stuck holding those things against them still, which even if the person made a mistake or did something, it's not fair to hold on to that if you're trying to move forward, because we can't do anything about it because it already happened. So we have to be willing to both commit to moving forward and not holding on to those old hurts and those old situations.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. And I would just add the one thing that you haven't mentioned is time. It's going to take time to get through those. So it's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take a little bit of time, different steps each and every single day to rebuild that trust. And so you have to be intentional and understand that it's not going to happen in 24 hours. It's going to take some time for that to happen. So be mindful of that.
Okay. All right, we appreciate you all tuning in. Thank you all for taking time on your Sunday to be with us. Everybody send your questions in the comments, and next week we'll answer those. We'll have our new episode of the Right Conversation coming out on this coming Thursday. All right, so thank you guys. We appreciate it. We'll see you all next week.
Take care.
Peace. Appreciate
Thanks.
it.